Adventure travel is reaching extraordinary heights. Rocket launches, dreams of settling on Mars, and tourists touring the atmosphere. Billionaires are leading the charge to reach beyond the stars. But what price is our planet paying as space gets commercialized? I'm Stefanie Dekker, and this is The Stream.
But I've always been interested in astrophysics and interested in astronomy and astrology and the stars. I feel like we are all made of stardust.
We're so connected. Super connected.
Now, after completing an 11-minute space journey, pop star Katy Perry stated the flight with Blue Origin was, quote, all for the benefit of the Earth. But those comments, the journey itself, and the woman who launched toward the stars were subject to heavy scrutiny and backlash online. Blue Origin, owned by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, says its space flights produce no carbon emissions. But experts are worried that this event was aiming to normalize space tourism and destroy our planet in the process. Well, to unpack all of this, we have Eloise Marais, Professor of Atmospheric Chemistry and Air Quality at University College London, Vishal Prasad, Director of the Pacific Islands Students Against Climate Change in Suva, Fiji, and Melanie Hamlett, a journalist and comedian, joining us from Lyon in France. Eloise, I want to start with you. The environmental impact of space travel, particularly as we're seeing this space race, particularly space tourism, what impact is it having on the environment?
The aspects that we're concerned about it potentially having an impact on is the ozone layer. So it's a layer about 10 to 50 kilometers overhead, where pollutants can be released directly into those layers by the rockets that are used for space tourism, and then they can deplete ozone. And then there's also a climate component. So some of the pollutants that are released can absorb incoming sunlight and warm up the local atmosphere and essentially alter the balance of our climate.
Well, that brings me to Katy Perry, who got a lot of flack for how she behaved during the launch and what she said, even the song she sang while up there, What a Wonderful World. Let's take a look.
You'll never know the amount of love that you have inside of you to give and to receive, and you're surrendering and you're hoping.
It is a love based on giving and receiving, as well as having and sharing. And the love that they give and have is shared and received.
This is what I genuinely want from the bottom of my heart, is for Katy Perry to have sang What a Wonderful World like Louis Armstrong. That would have been fire. I'm not gonna lie. That's a Katy I can get behind. If Kayla, I see his ring, floating. If Katy Perry had been floating, singing What a Wonderful,
Melanie, I see you laughing. You feel strongly about this all-female 11-minute touching space trip. You're certainly not the only one. What triggered you?
They're repackaging patriarchy and trying to sell it as feminism. This idea that this is somehow empowering, as if they're the first women to ever go to space. And then the whole glam and eyelash extensions. I mean, it reminded me of like sexy Halloween. Let's take everything and make it sexy. It's like, there's a lot of things I could go on and on, but it was gross. It was like, it just felt like a big commercial for space when it is such a destructive industry, space tourism, and they're using women to normalize it, hoping that maybe rich women will buy these tickets. And I can't get behind that.
Women, that brings us straight to a clip I want to play, because the Blue Origin space launch had the internet talking, but not for the right reasons, as we've been discussing. Let's take a look at a message directed at journalist Gayle King, who was part of that crew.
So apparently you are upset at the masses because we're not viewing your excursion to space as the women's empowerment, girl power moment that you see it as. And to that, all I have to say is it's really hard for me to view you spending 2 minutes and 43 seconds in space as a girl power moment when I'm simultaneously watching married women lose their right to vote. Right? It's really hard for me to watch and feel, girl boss up, watching you spend 1 minute and 45 seconds in space when I'm simultaneously watching women die due to a lack of reproductive health care access, right? It's really hard for me to feel empowered as a woman watching you spend 52 seconds in space when I am simultaneously watching women lose their jobs due to the erasure of DEI, including women astronauts.
So completely tone deaf on so many levels. Vishal, I want to go to you firsthand. Facing an existential crisis, your islands are sinking, your people are being relocated, your ancestors, the graves of your ancestors are being washed away. Do you think people understand how serious the crisis is and what we are facing globally?
Frankly, I don't think the message has gone as clearly as we would want people to understand. Here in the Pacific, what we face on a day-to-day basis is an existential problem of climate change. We have sea level rise coming in, affecting livelihoods, affecting how people have been living their lives for generations, and having to relocate, having to consider what tomorrow would be like, which is completely different from how they would have envisioned, and leaving their cultures, their ancestors, their sacred burial grounds behind, and having all of the human rights essentially violated because of climate change. So I don't think the reality of climate change has gone to, and people are understanding the extent to which the problem exists in many frontline communities, and we seem to be looking at ways to numb the problem and not talk about it. And this, in my opinion, really is one very clear example of us not dealing with the problem on hand and trying to look elsewhere.
It is really about humans apparently don't seem to understand unless they're being directly impacted, right? Eloise, I want to move to you. Space does allow for some benefits when it comes to climate change in the sense of monitoring climate change, using technologies. There's also GPS. Try to break it down for us briefly, what benefits it gives us, but space tourism is taking it to another level, isn't it?
Yeah, in my own research, I rely heavily on satellite observations of air quality and climate to help me understand air pollution in parts of the world where we don't have the infrastructure for observing it from the ground. But these kind of satellites, GPS, climate and air quality monitoring satellites make up a very small component of the activity that's taking place, the growth in activity that's taking place as well. The majority of satellites that are being launched into space are currently from commercial entities, in particular from SpaceX's mega constellation missions. And certainly for space tourism, it's quite difficult to really motivate the benefit to us, the benefit to our environment, and so on, when only a handful of people have the means to experience it.
Because you were saying in the pre-interview that it's really the commercialization of space that's the biggest contribution to space junk. Is that correct?
Yeah, certainly over the last few years when mega constellation missions have started to take off, they're contributing to 80–90% of the accumulation of satellites in space that are eventually going to turn into space junk, no longer be utilized, and need to return back to Earth in order to be disposed of. So the only viable way that we have to dispose of satellites currently is that they pass through the mesosphere, the higher layers of the atmosphere, and in that process burn up and ideally completely vaporize. But in that process, they're actually releasing pollutants into the atmosphere that harm the ozone layer and affect climate.
Melanie, you used to teach kids, right, on the environment. You said you used to whitewater raft. You're very familiar. How would you describe what these billionaires are doing. I just want to mention some numbers, sort of the aim, SpaceX saying that, ideally they'd like to launch 1,000 flights a year, Virgin Galactic saying 400 flights per year. If this happens, how would you describe what this is? What are these billionaires doing?
I've lived in places like Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Taos, New Mexico, and a lot of these towns, ski towns, small towns, that there's the environmental impact, first of all. And then there's also the social impact, the economic impact. I lived in my truck in the summer times in a mattress on the floor in the winter times because the locals can't afford to live in these places that are playgrounds for millionaires and billionaires. And so they get priced out. They can barely pay their bills, feed their families, so that rich people can have fun and have an adrenaline rush, or as Lauren was on the other side of fears, using all these talking points like their spiritual growth or Katy Perry's divine feminine agenda with this thing, when it's not at all about that. They're just tourists, and they ruin the very places that they go, and it impacts the most vulnerable people in those places. So I think what they're doing is the ski towns are a microcosm of it, and this is next level. This is what's happening in tourism in the United States and all over the world. Rich people go in these places, destroying the economy of those places, the housing, everything. And then now they're doing it with all of Earth. So it's offensive on every level. And I think people saw right through this. And they think we're dumb. They didn't think we would see this as really gross and weird, especially in this time with everything happening in the United States, especially to women. And I'm glad they got the backlash, not the misogyny and the misogynoir and all the stuff that came with that, but the backlash was warranted.
Completely tone deaf. Vishal, you have taken this issue to the highest court in the world. An extraordinary measure, trying to get, sometimes accountability is so difficult to get when it comes to countries and money. Are you hopeful that something can change? What is it you want to see from the ICJ?
Well, we took the matter of climate change to the world's highest court. Began as a group of students in the University of the South Pacific in 2019 to try to get an answer to this existential problem of climate change for our homelands and for our people here in the Pacific and other countries. What we're hoping to see is that the ICJ provides a transformative way to interpret how and what state obligations are and what states have to do at a bare minimum to address the climate crisis. For so long, we've been operating in the zone of uncertainty, and countries have been allowed to exploit their interpretation of what they should be doing. But that stops here, and we need the ICJ. We're looking at the ICJ to clarify and tell countries, at the very least, what do you need to do in terms of very, very crucial elements and contentious points such as fossil fuel phase-out, loss and damage, providing protection for vulnerable countries, and the protection of human rights. So all of these issues have been operating in a very uncertain space. And with this opinion, the world's highest court has a chance to address them and settle these matters of law, so that we're able to move beyond this and really use it as a tool. The ICJ's advisory opinion is the climate justice tool that we've been looking for to push our countries, push the big polluters and hold them accountable, really hold power accountable, so that we're able to realize the goals and aspirations of many frontline communities in wanting to see climate justice, and something that they've been calling for with great leadership for so long.
That's quite incredible. I think people fail to realize what Vishal is doing is not just on behalf of the Pacific Islands. I mean, it is for humanity in general. One day it's going to come to all of our doors. Eloise, is there regulation when it comes to space travel? Is there a body that's going to say, well, stop, this is too much, you can't do that?
There's a certain degree of regulation, but when it comes to controlling the pollutants that are coming from rocket launches as well as from re-entering space junk, there really isn't regulation to control it. We have things like the Montreal Protocol that were established entirely to regulate earthbound ozone-depleting substances that come from our industrial sources, but we don't really have regulation in place to control the pollution that comes from rocket launches that essentially ascend through the entire atmosphere. So this is something that we are discussing with entities that have the potential to regulate, to alert them that there is the potential for such dramatic space sector growth to have a really large impact on the environment. And if we act now, we could prevent damage to the environment. We could make sure that space is available to all generations beyond us, so that it is essentially of benefit to humanity beyond the next few years, when we're going to start to inundate it with lots of clutter and also add pollution to the atmosphere.
You were mentioning the ozone layer there. There's actually some good climate news when it comes to the ozone layer. It's on track to make a full recovery, apparently by 2050, after the Montreal Protocol was ratified in 1989. Now, ozone-depleting substances like those previously found in aerosol sprays ate away at the crucial layer protecting the Earth from the sun's UV rays. Although companies like Blue Origin claim that their space flights have no carbon emissions, they do release water vapor, which can deplete the ozone and threaten to undo all the progress that we've made. Melanie, undo all the progress that we have made for what? How disconnected are they? And is there any support for this?
I mean, what was really frustrating about this whole thing is that there were actually two people who worked for NASA on that space, whatever. I believe that space and the science and NASA were doing good things, but the space tourism part, it's a joke and it's causing harm. And then they're using women to sell it for it's like $150,000 deposit for a ticket on this. I think this was actually progress, because I didn't realize how many people were against space tourism until I saw all this backlash. I thought people were like kind of buying into it, but it's this consumerism of like, let's buy more things, and then also go make sure you get your Botox before you go to space, you know. And especially in a moment where we have girls who, you know, Katy Perry said that she's doing it, you know, to inspire little girls, but then she talked about putting the ass back in astronaut, and she talks about, what am I going to wear? And we're at a moment where little girls who are 10 years old are buying anti-aging beauty products at Sephora, when we weren't doing that. When, like, girls are already targeted with this obsession with objectifying themselves, and they made it all about that. If they had not done that, maybe it wouldn't have gone over so terribly, but people saw right through it. It was like sexy trad wife goes to space, some sort of weird propaganda, and people didn't buy it, and I kind of love it. Although I hate that you know, Amanda Wynn, like she got the sexual assault Bill of Rights passed. Like, she did amazing things, and that was lost. The women who had done amazing things was totally lost by this gross commercial for something totally unnecessary and very harmful to everybody and the Earth. So I'm actually really hopeful after seeing the backlash, although again, we'll never sign off on the unnecessary misogyny and the way it was done when they attacked things that have nothing to do with this.
There was a massive backlash. Vishal, when you see this and you look at these videos, you know, celebrities are preaching love after their experience. How does that make you feel when your world is literally disappearing? I mean, there seems to be such a huge disconnect.
Absolutely. There seems to be such a huge disconnect. It's very frustrating, really, to see that the world's attention and the richest few in the world are choosing to, this is how they're choosing to spend their money. And frankly, when our planet is burning, we're facing an existential problem and we're in a climate emergency. And instead of looking at how we can address the problem, we are completely detouring and not addressing anything. We know that the problem of climate change, at least the recent research that has come out, has said that 2/3 of the world's carbon emissions has come from 10% of the world's richest people. And this is carbon emissions from 1990 onwards. And that's a huge contribution that is on the hands of the richest people of the world. And there should be a responsibility of the richest people who are continuing these cycles of oppression and injustice that have led so many people to die, to be in situations where their lives are threatened because of climate change. But we're not addressing these challenges. Instead, we're looking at these other opportunities, these other things, and as I said, these ways of numbing the pain and numbing the discourse altogether, when we really should be talking about how can we put the fire out in our own backyard, in our own planet, where we have so many people suffering, so many people dying literally as we speak.
Billions of dollars that could be repurposed for a much better cause. Eloise, you are trying to crowdfund an app, if I understand correctly, to monitor the emissions from rockets. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And what would the benefits be?
We've put together a very rudimentary emissions tracker, essentially of rocket launches and re-entry of space junk, to try and track how these emissions are increasing over time, but to also look at things like inaugural events, new spaceports that are being established, new kinds of rockets that are being launched, essentially to keep a track of how these emissions are increasing over time so that we can put numbers on these trends in order to push regulators and advocacy groups and other interest groups to move towards change, to ensure that we do regulate this industry.
I was reading an article today that they were saying that the pace of the space race is faster than the science can keep up about the consequences of the damage that we're going to do once again. It's the idea that we've ruined the planet. Let's not fix it, but let's pump billions into getting off it, and consequentially killing it more and more and polluting the next frontier too. Here is some food for thought.
Should we try to save the Earth instead of trying to get off it? So it's a very serious question, this. It's really important to say that nobody I've spoken to, and certainly my opinion, is that you don't try and go into space and up to the moon and Mars and build space stations and so on so you can escape the Earth when you've messed it up. It is the opposite. The idea is that by going into space, building infrastructure, ultimately accessing resources in space, and all the good things you can do in space, drug development, developing semiconductors, all sorts of industries that we can imagine in Earth orbit, you save the Earth, because the Earth is the best place in the universe because we evolved on it and it's unique. So the idea of going into space is not to mess the Earth up and then escape it. It is exactly the opposite.
Melanie, we're going to have to keep it brief. We're running out of time, but I want to briefly ask you, we've got Elon Musk, we've got the new US administration, President Donald Trump. I read that this administration is considering stopping research into, space pollution. What message do you think which way is this US administration going to go?
It's going full throttle towards this, AI, all of these things that are very destructive to the environment. They're taking any accountability and research around the harm it's caused. So, yeah, I'm really worried because we also see what happens to the places where these space stations are built. But I'm glad people are not falling for it, that we see through it. That's what gives me hope, honestly, is that we see what they're doing, especially women that they were trying to pull one over on. We were like, we know what you're doing.
The great thing about social media is there is instant accountability, isn't there? There can be a mass backlash. Vishal, I want to give you the final word. You are someone living at the front line, as you mentioned, of climate change. You have seen what it does. You've tried to take it to the world's highest court. What is your message to the world, to governments, to the billionaires that are, pumping billions into their space missions? What would you say?
I think something that we've been trying to get, a message that we're trying to get across to people from our campaign is that in a few months, the ICJ will issue its advisory opinion. It'll be a tool to hold power accountable, to demand greater action, accountability, and fairness within the systems and how we address climate change so that it works for the vulnerable, it works for people, and also works for future generations. Once the opinion is out, it'll be a tool that we need to wield. We need to find creative ways to insert the outcomes of the ICJ into litigation, into negotiations, into policy, research, etc. And so it falls upon all of us and the power of the people to really mobilize around a transformative ruling from the ICJ. We believe it's going to be a transformative ruling to help shape the narrative and drive the transformative change. On this subject of space exploration, etc., and in relation to climate, I really think that the legacy of our generation won't be defined by who touches the edge of space or who gets there first in the number of people, but about who has the courage to stay and repair the planet and the damage that's been done for people now and for future generations.
Who has the courage to repair our planet? Eloise, Vishal, and Melanie, thank you so very much for joining us today on this very important subject. And thank you for being part of the conversation. And I'll see you soon.